So we're focusing on what we do with the Wavemakers on our customer journeys and get the carbon footprint of the end-to-end process, and providing some tips on the personal carbon footprint, but also how you can execute them at work or at home and in your daily life. So why should ICT be sustainable? We heard a lot already in the previous session, but if you don't do anything yet or now, this greenhouse gas emissions may triple in 20 years. And this is from a research from 2018 without generative AI. So if you ask me, I think it will be 5 or 10 years or faster. So I think that's a good reason already to do something. And that's where we having the Wavemakers for within the Rabobank. And what we want to do is to incorporate sustainability in everything what we do, but in a fun and meaningful way. It's not always the nicest things to do because not the coolest topic sometimes, or most of the time. The Wavemakers assets. We have 4 steps. First one is training and awareness, where we try to make our colleagues aware of the need of sustainability in what they're doing at work, developing code and more. We have a mandatory training for that, and also function role specific trainings that are coming up based on what you do, management or developer, architect, name it. Second one is building an assessment for the baseline. We're looking at what is a team doing, what kind of software do they have, and set a starting point to look at and support them with coaching in the trip to sustainable software development, which we measure with EcoSonar, a different topic for later maybe, but that's a rule-based code scanning tool to see if the code is written efficiently and give recommendations on how you can improve your code in making sustainable software. And then we come to the Carbon Insight tool. At the point when your code is sustainable enough, we are going to implement it finally. It always takes time. But then you can measure your whole footprint in the chain, end-to-end chain, from the user experience until the flow is done. And then I will ask Sophie to tell something more about the Carbon Insight tool.
Thanks, Maikel. Yeah, so the core purpose of us as the Wavemakers within the Rabobank is to push this sustainable IT transition towards the organization. And indeed, starting with some awareness. Most people aren't really aware of the environmental impact of IT, but also, for example, social impact like accessibility or bias. Once we have that awareness within the organization, we want to do something. We want to generate some change so that the developers and the squads and the leadership do something to make their features, their IT landscape more sustainable. So we started doing that, but then at some point they started to ask the question, okay, we're doing this, we're making this investment, we are prioritizing sustainability strategies, but how much carbon did we actually save? And that's a tricky question to answer, but it's very, very relevant to start monitoring these carbon emissions. So why do we do this? Bottom line, compliance. As some of you might be aware of, the CSRD is coming next year, and the large corporations such as the Rabobank are required by the European Union to report their greenhouse gas emissions of their operations, and especially a large bank like the Rabobank, IT is a very big part of their operations. But there's more. So what we do with sustainable IT, we want to bring the same value, but using less resources, less energy, less hardware, less carbon emissions. But if you do this, if you optimize this, you can also reduce your costs. Because if you eliminate all the waste that you don't use, there are less processes running in, for example, cloud or an on-premise data center. Sustainable business growth. As an organization, if you're more critical on the IT that you're using, by eliminating this waste, you become more agile, skip some of the bureaucratic processes, and that can actually be a competitive advantage in this market. And lastly, the culture of sustainability. We really see it around us. The colleagues, especially the young ones, they have a very intrinsic drive to do something with sustainability. And by providing these tools, these trainings, and these insights, you really foster this culture of sustainability within our organization. And bottom line, what you can't measure, you can't improve. We can all say we want to be sustainable. We have these net zero targets for 2015. But how do we know if we're actually on track to the Paris Agreement if we don't know the carbon emissions of our own IT operations? So, there is a need for measuring, but there's actually two kinds of measuring that are both necessary. And I hope to explain that a bit to you. We have top-down monitoring and we have bottom-up monitoring. So top-down monitoring would be the carbon emissions of your entire on-premise data center or your cloud resources. And this data is often available. For example, of your on-premise data center, you know the energy bill and you can convert that to carbon emissions. Also from Microsoft Cloud, the impact emissions dashboard communicates to you the carbon footprint of your cloud resources. So that you know. And from there you can make a strategy how much you need to reduce for your net zero target. You can also report that to your compliance department for the CSRD, because those are the most accurate numbers that you're going to get. But there is a problem. Because if a developer is working on a small feature within a large organization, for example a chatbot that is running somewhere in your on-premise data center, and you know the entire data center is emitting X tons of carbon emissions, how do you know how much responsibility you have as a single software squad? And ultimately, those are the people that can make the impact. They can make their code more sustainable. But they need some feedback, right? If they're going to change something, they want to know, did my code become more sustainable or less sustainable? And that is where the bottom-up comes in. So this is really granular insights targeted at individual software features. Those numbers are less accurate. Don't report them to the CSRD. But do report them to the developers, because they can take the action and of their own share, they can make it more sustainable, reduce the carbon emissions. And then if each of the software squad does this, all the software features get a bit more sustainable, you will see that being reflected in your top-down numbers. But this bottom-up monitoring, not a lot of that going on yet. We couldn't find any good off-the-shelf tools that were just could use, so we developed it ourselves. The Carbon Insights tool, and it's really for these developers. These developers are making software, for example, an appointment booking feature, where the client fills in their data to book an appointment with one of the support staff. And they are wondering, hopefully, how much carbon emissions does this feature emit? To figure that out, we went to the Green Software Foundation, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And they came up with a standard, it's now also an ISO standard, the software carbon intensity. And with this formula, you can calculate how much carbon your software is emitting. You want to know how much energy it uses, how much carbon is emitted to generate that energy, and you want to have a look at the amount of hardware used to run this feature, because there is also embodied carbon when you manufacture, and dispose this hardware. And then lastly, that's very interesting, that's the per R. This is called the functional unit, how your software is scaling. So, for example, this appointment booking feature. If thousands of people are booking an appointment, of course, there's more carbon emissions than when only 3 people are booking an appointment. And we don't want to create this target within a bank, okay, we're going to be sustainable, people cannot book appointments with us anymore. We still want to grow, we still want to give the business value, right? But each appointment that is being booked, we want to do that as efficient as possible. When the data is being sent over the network, we're going to compress it. We're not going to ask for unnecessary data. Why do we need to know the birth year of every of our clients? Maybe we do, but sometimes we don't. And then eliminate it. This data of this appointment, maybe it can be deleted 3 weeks after the appointment. Why do we need to store it for 7 years? So every appointment is going to be as efficient as possible, but then we can still grow. So, how do we do this? The Carbon Insights tool. Software itself doesn't emit any carbon. It's just text on a file. But once this software starts running on the hardware, that is where the carbon emissions come. It starts to consume energy and using hardware. And both is associated with carbon emissions. So what we need to do for a specific feature, we need to trace all the hardware that this software is touching. Starting with the user terminal, for example, laptop, smartwatch, or mobile device. That's the first bit of hardware that the software is interacting with. Then the data is being transferred over the network via Wi-Fi or 4G or internet cables. And lastly, we have some kind of infrastructure, a cloud or an on-premise data center. And we trace this software by looking at, for example, the CPU usage, the memory usage, or the gigabytes that are being transferred. Those are our proxy metrics to see how much this software is actually utilizing the hardware. And then we build this tool that has as input the resource usage data, the CPU, the memory, the gigabytes, transfers that to energy based on the hardware specifications, and then based on the location where the energy is being consumed, we can convert that to carbon emissions. So, for example, if your software runs in Scandinavian countries, the energy grid is much greener, and you can use the same energy, but emit less carbon. In Eastern Europe, generally the carbon emissions on the energy grid are a bit higher. And the Netherlands is somewhere in between. And then we have a dashboard that we can show to our software development squads, where they can trace the carbon emissions of their features. So the results with the pilot phase. So this is not a big application yet that all the software squads are using. Of course, that is our vision, but we are also working agile, starting small, starting with one software squad of this appointment booking feature. And these are our first results. So to book one appointment, so not the actual appointment or the video call, but just the feature of booking it in the form, these are the results of carbon emissions throughout the tiers of hardware. And then you get like 1.4 grams of carbon emissions to go over this user flow. Does make sense, maybe also if you think about the emails, that's a bit larger because you're going to store it much longer perhaps, and with the attachment it will be more data than just a name, an appointment date, etc. It's not a lot, but if you think about it, all the appointments, because there were quite a lot, we're a large bank, that are being booked in the past year were responsible for about 60,000 grams of carbon emissions. Still doesn't say a lot, so let's compare it again. This is around driving 260 kilometers by car. Again, not that much, not that shocking, but if you think about it, just a tiny feature, just fitting in one form of this large corporation is this amount of driving around. So you can imagine all the IT that we have, it's going to be much, much more. And at least so, like this, the developers that develop this feature know their carbon footprint, and they can also prioritize carbon reduction strategies. We see the infrastructure is the largest part of the carbon emissions, so let's start there. And we could drill down even further, and from this infrastructure it was mostly the CPU usage. So they can do something to optimize that. Maybe less verification of the surname. It could be a business decision to do it anyway, but you can think of what kind of compute processes are used to verify the data, or the availability. Maybe just calculate the availability for the next month rather than the next year. That can also reduce your CPU cycles. So, insights is never the end goal, right? If we just know this, nothing is going to happen. But this is a very nice tool for us to then start applying green software and actually verifying that it worked. To make your software more sustainable, there's generally these three pillars. We want to make it more energy efficient, bring the same value but just use less energy. More hardware efficient, maybe consolidating multiple workloads onto one server rather than dispersing it over multiple servers that are being idle. Or, and the last one that's interesting is carbon awareness, especially if you have a task that is schedulable. Think, for example, of training your Gen AI model. This takes a lot of energy, and it doesn't really matter if you did it yesterday or tomorrow. It's not a time-critical task. So for these schedulable, large, compute-intensive jobs, look at the electricity maps. When is the energy going to be green? And then execute that task. So you're going to be smart about when to run it, what time, what place. And yeah, so this is what we're doing with the Rabobank. Of course, this is a large organization, and this is a project that's been going on for a couple of months already. So I hope to inspire you to at least get started with monitoring and reducing your carbon footprint. But I would also like to hand over the mic to you, so you can show a bit more hands-on quick examples that you can get started with right away.
Thank you. Browser tags, for example. Do you recognize this? This is not actual, was just for show now. But normally I have 4 or 5 windows with this. But not anymore. It's a very simple thing to organize it a little bit better, just to use groups. And there's I think it's quite new, an option to hide the group tab and sync it with your other devices, if you like. If you, in privacy, then you maybe don't want to do that, but I think it's really easy. It saves a lot of Googling to your old searches. And if you group it and just simply hide it, it will be fully unloaded. And that can be really simple, and you'll save resources for other tasks. Other simple, quick wins is like shutting down instead of hibernating, or put your server or laptop in standby. Maybe server, wrong example, but you can still computer. Demand shifting. Now, that's something Sophie already told in the carbon awareness part. Running heavy tasks, download your movies at moments that the energy is renewable and green instead of at night. You're not watching your movie in the morning probably also. And then automation. If you take a look at email, for example, I had a period I had thousands of emails in my inbox, mostly unread. I had 77% by the way. And because looking to my inbox. And that was something to think about. And it's that's also quite easy to solve. You can create rules to archive your mail from a week or a month old, and after a year you delete it, or you put it on a thumb drive and put it in a safe, but get it from your computer or from the cloud. And video calling, that's a nice one since COVID. And I think half a year ago, in Teams we saw balloons and fireworks, and some people keep using that, and that's not really sustainable, and it's probably only fun for the one who does it in the end. Yeah, it's using a lot of data, and it's and resources of your system, so it's better to turn it off. I most of the time use nothing, but if you work a lot at home these days, so the blur can be really helpful if you are in an important meeting and you don't want people to watch in your living room, for example. But it's a good thing to think about it, to use background images or blurs or balloons for some reason.